right. Thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. Today's webinar is being recorded. We'll share the recording and resources with all registrants within 3 to 5 days after the event, and that will be on NCAI's website and YouTube page. For questions, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window. You can submit questions anytime. When submitting a question, please write your title and the organization you're representing. Press and federal partners are invited to listen to this webinar. However, please reserve questions for tribal leaders and tribal stakeholders. And with that, I will turn it over to NCAI Executive Director Larry Wright Jr. for an opening invocation.
Thank you, Matt. Honored to do this invocation, try to get us started in a good way on this important issue for our people. Oh, Wakanda, then on the Ombade. Kodakte ishti wiblahashidade. Si dego wongi de gati te wiblahashidade. Ponkungade, Bruga, the Alma Gidaga. Nyanshinga, uke di wongi de ekitaha, wadombaga. Nyanshinga, wanoshe hidi, ishti daeda de komlega. Alejubakti, agati, the Alma Gidaga. Ida da uda ke ahigi. Great Spirit, it's good to pray to you today. We thank you for all the blessings that you give our people, the challenges that you put before us. Ask for that strength and humility to encourage for all of us to help our people in these hard times. I say a special prayer for my Ponca people and for all of our tribal nations, all that work on behalf to help our people. Say a special prayer for our veterans and their families, and those that are in harm's way, and those that don't come home. Pray for each and every one of them. Thank you again for all the things that you do to watch over us and the strength that you give all the people in these hard times, helping our citizens. Gatega wiblahan sheno. Thank you. Thank you, Matt.
So the presenters we will have today are going to be Executive Director of National Congress American Indians, Larry Wright Jr., Executive Director of National American Indian Housing Council, Rudy Soto, Federal Affairs Associate with the NAHC, Blythe McWhirter, myself as Policy Lead for NCAI, and special guest Jackie Para from Tlingit Haida Regional Housing Authority and board member for NHC. So now I'll turn it over to you, Larry.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Matt. I hope Pokamoshe won't de Homba de wiki de go. They not hik de Wibla Pokamoshe Alashwa de Wanoke Larry Wright Jr. Ijazik Dabli Wishti Usni Ponka Sichangula Kotabli. Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I want to say thank you to our panelists for taking the time to be with us and speak on this important issue for Indian country. My name is Larry Wright Jr. I am the Executive Director for National Congress of American Indians. NCAI has long championed Indian housing, and our membership has adopted multiple standing resolutions calling for the reauthorization and full funding of NAHASDA, along with policies that address affordability, overcrowding, infrastructure, and climate resilient homes across Indian country. Today, we are experiencing deep partisan divisions within Congress, and this has impacted the type and amount of legislation that has been signed into law. Despite these challenges, housing-related issues have seen widespread bipartisan support, and it is our hope that NAHASDA will have the bipartisan support needed to be reauthorized by this Congress. The strength of these efforts comes from our unity as tribal nations, speaking with one voice, bringing data-driven solutions, and insisting that federal partners honor the trust and treaty responsibilities. NCAI is very fortunate to have the National American Indian Housing Council as a partner in these efforts. And just as a reminder, we want to call on everyone here that you join us at our 82nd annual convention in Marketplace at the Seattle Convention Center next month in Seattle, November 16th through the 21st. This will be our largest gathering of the year, where we set national policy priorities. We are electing officers this year and celebrate the strength of Indian country. If your tribal nation is not a member of NCAI, but you would like to participate in the upcoming elections and resolution process, a number of housing-related resolutions have been proposed, and we would love to have your voice at the table as we discuss and vote on those resolutions. Thank you all again for being here today. It's time to do the hard work, and I would like to now turn this over to Rudy Soto, Executive Director for the National American Indian Housing Council. Rudy?
Thank you, Larry. Greetings, everyone. It's an honor to serve as the Executive Director for the National American Indian Housing Council. Thank you all for sharing your time with us to join today's important discussion hosted by NCAI. We've come together at a critical moment for Indian country. The ongoing government shutdown is the elephant in the room. It's disruptive of government services, stalling important work, and directly impacting tribes' ability to provide vital programs and services. Until it's resolved, the uncertainty continues to compound an already dire housing crisis across the nation, and especially in Indian country. Today's webinar will go over what the shutdown means for our housing programs right now, and we'll cover the broader state of play when it comes to the Native American Housing Assistance and Self-Determination Act reauthorization efforts, and any other key policy priorities that must move forward once Congress is back to work. We're grateful for NCAI for using their platform to elevate these challenges and for standing shoulder to shoulder with the NIHC and our housing leaders nationwide. Together, we'll continue advocating to protect and advance tribal housing programs and the sovereignty that underpins them. Thank you for being here for this conversation and for your commitment to ensuring every Native family has access to a safe, affordable, and decent housing. I'll hand it over to my colleague, Blythe McWhirter, our Federal Affairs Associate. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Rudy. And thank you to NCAI for having us today. With Rudy's comments, I do want to start off today by grounding us in the current circumstances that we are in, and tying that back, to our broader conversation on the Native housing crisis and reauthorizing NAHASDA. So to start today, I'll just provide a brief overview. If we can go to the next slide. On government shutdowns, NCAI did host a webinar going over the impacts of the government shutdown recently, and I believe those resources are still up on the website. But just for context, government shutdown occurs when Congress fails to pass appropriations or continuing resolution or CR by the fiscal year deadline. And unfortunately, the failure to pass the appropriations or continuing resolution by the deadline has become the norm rather than an exception. Only 3 federal budgets have been enacted on time in the past 47 years. So we are in a shutdown at the moment. One thing I do want to highlight that is distinguishing is this is now the second longest shutdown in our history. So that just makes it even more critical and important that you all share those impacts that you're seeing on the ground with us, so we can continue to keep that information relevant and make sure that tribal housing programs and any disruptions to their operations are highlighted and seen amongst the government shutdown. So then I also just wanted to highlight, if we can go to the next slide, that unfortunately at the federal level, most tribal programs are discretionary, not mandatory. And so when the government does shut down, the tribal programs face disruption. Some programs do now have advance or forward funded appropriations. So they are funded across multiple years, and so that they are able to continue. So some examples would be like at the Indian Health Services, using, balances, they're able to maintain their operations. But many other tribal programs, including tribal housing programs and programs underneath the Housing and Urban Development Office of Native American Programs, face severe disruption as the staff are unable to continue their standard work, and access to technical assistance and other components of interacting regularly with federal employees are disrupted. If we can go to the next slide. So I just wanted to briefly, at the top of our call today, focus on HUD's contingency plans as they're planned during the government shutdown, so we can highlight what is paused and delayed and what functions do continue at HUD for clarity. So routine drawdowns of funds can continue through ELOCs and other grant management systems. The Treasury can disperse funds that have already been obligated, but unfortunately, any transactions through these systems that do require HUD approval will be delayed. And this could be whether they are above a certain monetary threshold or other reasons that HUD needs to approve. And an exception to this is if there is a situation or circumstance where there's imminent threat to life or property. And in that case, HUD may bring back staff intermittently to address these issues. The HUD user help desk is still active if you have technical issues with accessing your grants management systems, although we have heard at this point, potentially for certain systems with like technical troubleshooting, there's been delay in hearing back. So we're continuing to monitor that, but just again, encourage you to keep us updated on any issues and delays that you are seeing on the ground. And previously approved technical assistance work will continue. And again, just if there's urgent threats to life or safety of property, then HUD staff may be brought back intermittently. So this is just kind of overarching, highlighting how funding and program support flowing to tribes becomes unpredictable in the context of a shutdown. There are, immediate disruptions to operations for tribes and TDHEs when we find ourselves in these situations. So I just wanted to give a brief overview there. And then if we can go to the next slide. Another component of this shutdown that I did want to highlight today is an additional wave of reductions in force that we have heard. And I want to specifically highlight the RIFs at the Native CDFI Fund at the Department of the Treasury. On December 13th, all staff at the CDFI Fund received termination notices, or not on December 13th, effective December 13th, I apologize, received termination notices. And the impact of this is that with no staff at the CDFI Fund, that's jeopardizing $63 million in federal funding and $500 million in leveraged private investment that is at risk. And we know, with our work, that Native CDFIs are a critical path to home ownership. We know that when Native-led financial institutions are involved in mortgage loan processing, Native families are able to succeed and achieve their dreams of home ownership. And so we want to continue to encourage support of protecting the CDFI Fund staff and protecting, this crucial funding at the Department of Treasury. The Native CDFI Network sent a joint sign-on letter that had 152 co-signers, including our organization, as well as a number of the other organizations in our Coalition for Tribal Sovereignty group. And then I also wanted to highlight there was a letter sent from GOP congressional leaders in the House and the Senate on the 23rd, urging the administration to protect the CDFI Fund. So we just encourage you to, continue supporting these efforts in support of this these critical programs. And then the next slide. And so just to tie the shutdown impacts back to NAHASDA reauthorization, NAHASDA's authorization expired in 2013, over a decade ago. And so HUD relies on annual appropriations year to year to continue the programs within NAHASDA, including IHBG. And reauthorization would restore clarity and stability here because the statutory authority is expired. There's greater uncertainty in terms of which activities continue and resume and how quickly they do after a lapse in appropriations. And so reauthorization would ensure, the federal government's trust and treaty obligation to provide safe housing doesn't disappear even if there's political gridlock in Congress. And it would not override, I want to make clear, it would not override shutdown restrictions, but it's just another level of stability that we're currently lacking at this moment. So with that, on this next slide, I just want to continue to flag and amplify. We are soliciting and collecting shutdown impact responses. We do have an active survey. It's open on a rolling basis for us to review. So as this continues, especially as we're, now in our 28th day of the shutdown, impacts will continue to compound. So we just want to make sure we're encouraging folks to continue submitting their responses to that survey. And then NCAI does have a webpage that we've shared with our members in a number of our newsletters that has some really great resources on the government shutdown, FAQs, and a recording of that previous webinar. So with that, I appreciate everyone for being here and continuing to, keep us updated on any impacts you're seeing from this shutdown. And to tie it back to our overall conversation, I'll pass it to Matt so we can get some context and kind of look back at how we came here today with these federal housing programs.
Thank you, Blythe. So what I'll do is I'll cover some of the initial history of NAHASDA, or at least pre-NAHASDA, and I'll try to condense that. I know that this is a very dense history, but I'll do my best here to try to catch us up to speed on what's happened pre-NAHASDA. So before I get into the 37 Housing Act, one thing I want to note is, after forced relocation, or first off, my name is Matthew Vogel. I'm Service Policy Lead for NCAI. I come from the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe, and it's an honor to be here. So after forced relocations to reservations in the 1800s, housing conditions deteriorated dramatically. Compounding that was the Dawes Act, which broke up communal tribal lands into individual allotments, disrupting traditional living patterns and leading to widespread cases of poverty. The federal government built some houses on reservation, but it was generally inadequate or poorly constructed, insufficient in number, and often culturally inappropriate. Federal housing efforts before 1937 were largely administered on an ad hoc basis by individual reservation superintendents. And that was using funds that were not always specifically earmarked for housing programs. These programs generally existed as part of a broader U.S. civilization effort rather than as a dedicated housing initiative. But in 37, the 1937 Housing Act was a significant piece of legislation. Specifically, it created the first real major housing policy of the United States. What it did not do, unfortunately, is include Native Americans into that legislation, essentially restricting access to the improving housing conditions available to other low-income families. The housing gap, even with the 37 Housing Act, housing gap between reservations and other communities still widened. Economic opportunities tied to housing, such as equity and credit, still remained unavailable for Native American communities. Again, this was more about major federal legislation, but was not inclusive of Native tribes. So after 24 years, in 1961, tribes were recognized for their capacity to implement housing programs in their communities. The 61 Amendment authorized tribes to establish Indian housing authorities. Also, those Indian housing authorities qualified as public housing agencies. Another big provision of this amendment was it also allowed tribes, it also allowed permitted the construction of housing units on trust lands. The Second Amendment happened in 62. Most notable there is increase in federal cost share for tribal housing projects, reducing the financial burden on tribes and making participation more feasible for resource-limited communities. There was reduced or eliminated local matching fund requirements, recognizing that tribes lack the tax base and revenue-generating capacities of other municipalities. It expanded eligibility criteria to clarify that various types of tribal government entities could participate and not just those structured identically to municipal housing authorities. It also attempted to simplify the application process. This was an attempt to reduce the bureaucratic barriers that had made the 61 provisions difficult for tribes to access. Additionally, it authorized technical assistance programs to help tribes navigate complex federal housing regulations, acknowledged that tribes required some support to successfully implement these new housing initiatives. And finally, it created dedicated HUD positions to work specifically with tribes, establishing specialized expertise with the federal bureaucracy for housing matters. In 65, aside from the major programs under the Housing Act, the Bureau of Indian Affairs launched the Housing Improvement Program, or HIP, as most folks know it. This is to help the most disadvantaged Native American individuals. So initially, HIP funded new homes for those who couldn't get federal housing help elsewhere. It had a particular high focus on elderly. But just 2 years later, in 1967, the program changed its direction a bit. Instead of building new homes, they focused more on repair and renovations. Also, importantly, Native American tribes themselves became actively involved in the planning of how these funds would be used. So again, recognizing tribal capacity. In 65, we see a major change in the federal housing policy with the establishment of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The three key factors with the creation of HUD was the centralization of Indian housing programs, which were previously administered through Housing and Home Finance Agency, but are now centralized under a single umbrella of HUD. The establishment of HUD also elevated the voice. So by adding another cabinet member, you also had representation within the president's cabinet. One key provision of HUD's early establishment was the primary focus of the federal housing policy was designed for urban, suburban context, leaving most of Indian country as an afterthought in the early creation of HUD. And with that, that catches us up to 96, and then it's my honor to turn it over to Jackie Putta as our other panelists. So Jackie, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ganesh. So first of all, I want to also thank NCAI and AIC for partnering together. I think it's really important that we work together to be able to make these policy changes that are necessary. So in the history of NAHASDA, and just at a very high level to say, okay, here we are in the 1960s, in the 1960s, they finally are starting to recognize Indian housing. And when Secretary Cuomo got selected to be the Secretary of HUD, he came out with a blueprint for change. And it looked like all the other public housing documents of the past. It included Indian country with a very prescribed rental housing program, new mutual home ownership program, and didn't have the flexibilities. And at the same time, we were in Indian country, we were taking over, IHS with our self-governance, and we were moving forward with how we worked with in BIA. And so this era of self-determination was really taking hold. And in housing, we convened a meeting in NAHC. I was chair at the time. We convened a meeting of tribal leaders and tribal housing officials. And we said, what do we want instead of the blueprint for change? We came up with the principles of what we wanted to have, the flexibilities, the ability to just design and create programs that make sense for our own unique communities. And we drafted that bill up and we marched to the Hill that very same couple days, marched to the Hill and said, this is what we want instead of the blueprint for change. Don't keep including us in this, this federal bureaucracy in the same way. Unbeknownst to all of us, and very surprised, we had strong supporters in Congress. Congressman Lazio immediately said, draft it up, we'll introduce it. And then we worked on the Senate side with Senator Stevens, had lots of negotiations with him. And he also supported it. And actually, he was the one to help it cross the threshold for getting passed by Congress. Unusual for any bill from Indian country to have its own bill to get passed by Congress in one congressional session. And that's what happened with NAHASDA. And what it did was it eliminated all of our programs. So we had a variety of programs. We had the reduction programs, we had drug elimination, we had a variety of different programs. It pulled all of our funds from all those programs together. It plussed up on the dollar numbers to get us to 650 million. But it really emphasized self-determination and sovereignty and also encouraged leveraging of the NAHASDA dollars. Next slide. And so with the leveraging, we had some new things that were included in NAHASDA. So it was a single block grant, very similar to how a block grant program operated with a CDBG program operated with the municipalities. So you had total flexibility, you received a formula funding. The formula was based on negotiated rulemaking. The tribes decide what that criteria was. And it also allowed for these elements of loan guarantee so that you could borrow against your formula funding, or you could also encourage mortgage financing so that we had our version of true home ownership with the various loan guarantee programs that were available. And it included the Native Hawaiians. So it recognized that providing housing assistance similar to tribes was important, and they had their own title included. So those were the really new things that happened within that program. And next slide. And so, as I said, it had a formula, and the formula was determined by the tribes in negotiated rulemaking. And we didn't even run the numbers. We did it based upon these critical elements: the extent of poverty, populations, housing shortages, other geographic factors, but a lot of them included need without potable water, sewer systems, other kinds of things like that, overcrowding, other kinds of elements that really drove the formula that still exists today. And NAHASDA allowed for the flexibilities to do almost anything that you wanted to do around housing. So you could do down payment services, you can do infrastructure, you can plan and hold your money for multiple years, you can invest it, and then so you have enough for a project, especially for those that were small tribes. It gave base funding to small tribes, and really allowed for things that sometimes weren't included in other grants like planning and administration. So those things were really critical. Gave total flexibility to the tribes to design housing as they chose to design it for their own communities, including the programs. Next slide. And so that's really where we are with NAHASDA. The most important thing is that NAHASDA is up for reauthorization. As Matt said earlier, it's critical that this program does get reauthorized and is a voice of Congress that says that this is important. Of course, they do it every year with their spending allocations and appropriations. And so we want to talk a little bit about more of those things as we move to the next part of our agenda, which is turning to talking about the funding crisis. So I'm going to turn it over to Blythe.
Thank you, Jackie. Yeah, so when we talk about the current state of Indian housing, I think something that we always want to make sure that we talk about at the front of, our discussion, and this will help put in, the other components we're going to talk about. It just puts it really into context when we talk about the funding crisis, over the past 20 plus years. So as you can see with this graph, while, over the past 20 years, IHBG funding has remained relatively stagnant. There have been, some minor increases and decreases prior to 2022 and 3. But as you can see with this red line down here, I think what we always really want to highlight is flat funding when there's no adjustment for inflation is really decreased funding year to year in terms of the purchasing power of these programs. And so as you can see, at the point we were at in the early 2020s, inflation had eroded 29% of the program's value in real terms. Again, as we're talking about, adjusting for inflation, and accounts for less than 2% of HUD's budget. Even though in that time period, HUD's overall budget grew 58%. And I believe at that time when NAHASDA was first enacted, Native American programs accounted for about 2.5% of HUD's budget. So we are slowly getting closer back to that 2% number. But over time, there's been a real decrease in the purchasing power and value of this money. And I just want to also highlight, as you can see towards the end here, in 2024, we finally were able to get back up to a point where we were matching or close to matching the program's original purchasing power. And that's thanks to our champions in Congress, and our, supporters on the Appropriations Committee. And I'll always, highlight Chairman Tom Cole for, ensuring that tribal housing programs are not left behind as they were for the past 2 decades. And I think one thing that, we want to make sure that we continue to make clear after seeing this increase, but we know it as just bringing us back to, where we needed to be, is that this is our baseline at this point. The funding that we have for the Indian Housing Block Grant, it's the backbone of, the programs under ONAP. So this is our baseline. We do not want to see, these programs fall in the similar way that we did the past 2 decades. So that's really context setting. Overall, a lot of the issues that we'll talk about and the challenges we see on the ground could be addressed if we had more funding to support these programs. And the funding crisis just means that, the number of units we can build has not kept pace with inflation. And we have not been able to, adequately address degradation of quality housing and, account for population growth in our communities. So next slide. So as I mentioned, with the degradation of housing stock and population growth, according to I think so, the second bullet point here, this is from a 2017 HUD study, is which that's almost 10 years ago. So we know that as this crisis has continued and intensified, this number is likely larger, but this was the number at the time of the study. But compared to 5% of households nationwide, 23% of American Indian and Alaska Native households in tribal areas have major structural physical deficiencies. 6% lack complete plumbing, 7% lack complete kitchens. That's versus less than 2% nationally. So there's obviously a discrepancy here and a real crisis that we are seeing in our communities that we want to make sure are addressed. And again, this number of additional units needed to replace, degraded housing is likely higher at this point. And then also another challenge that we see on the ground, and a challenge that there has been, is the definition of homelessness. We know that 17% of tribal households have family members that are doubled up. This is about almost eight times the national average, as you can see with the 2.2% of households nationally. So, these are families, without privacy, children, living in overcrowded conditions. And so we want to make sure that those situations are adequately represented. It's not, the same picture that folks might imagine with street homelessness, but the lived conditions, are very much the same, and that they're disruptive. And folks do not have like the space and the quality of life. So I think here I just wanted to highlight how NAHASDA reauthorization and our recommendations and our hopes for what NAHASDA reauthorization would look like could address some of these challenges. Faster construction and repairs through a streamlined environmental review process can help us address these physical deficiencies in the housing stock. And then also another component of NAHASDA reauthorization would be making the tribal HUD-VASH program permanent. And so that would ensure that our Native veterans are able to find housing and have some stability and are not left behind. So I just wanted to highlight that, and then I'll hand the conversation back to Matt to take us through some economic challenges and challenges with navigating trust land.
Thank you, Blythe. Yeah, so this is highlighting, just the real issue of families of ability to afford safe and low-income housing. So again, as the slide states, 1/3 of Native households on tribal lands live in poverty. That's compared to 18% nationally. And that is not exclusive to, that's not an exclusive number to all of Indian country. There's obviously varied poverty rates based on location. So just for example, some of the tribal communities in the plains, which is a rural region, have an especially high poverty rate, usually on average 41%, but in some cases can be much higher depending on the individual tribal nation. And the purchasing power, again, as an individual household. So Native households only have 8 cents of wealth for every $1 that the average white American household has, according to research by the National Indian Council on Aging. So while high poverty rates are not exclusive to Indian country, it is disproportionately higher than other demographic groups. Again, highlighting the multi-layered challenges that present themselves when trying to develop affordable housing for low to very low income families. And as folks' ability to afford not only the necessities in their life, housing costs are up there as one of the most significant costs to an individual household. So again, poverty and economic stress definitely makes this much more difficult in Indian country when trying to produce affordable housing options for low and very low income families. So this next point is navigating trust land. This is a very complex issue, very multi-layered, but essentially the legal status of trust or restricted land in tribal areas can be very complicated, especially when you're dealing with mortgage lending, making it a lot more difficult to navigate the ability for families to buy homes or developers to finance housing construction. There's often multiple approvals that are required when trying to develop on trust land. Just for example, a tribal member seeking home ownership, must first receive an approval for a home site, usually approved by the tribal government or your tribal councils. The second is after getting approval for that home site, they must find a lender who will then approve a mortgage loan on trust land, whether it be tribal or allotted. After obtaining approval, the homeowner or tribal member must then obtain a title status report, which is usually required by the lender but recorded by BIA. This can vary tribe by tribe, but in the worst cases can take years to obtain. Or on the flip side, if you're a TDHE, these steps remain similar, but depending on the permanent financing loans that you've obtained to develop, you may be required to seek an additional HUD approval in addition to tribal and BIA processes. So again, multiple layers, complex navigation for development or those seeking homeownership. Again, this has been a common knowledge across Indian country is historically financial institutions have been reluctant, whether that be presumptions that lending on trust land is high risk or that existing lending models are not applicable to tribal nations and trust lands. I will note that there are some legislative efforts in this Congress that are trying to address some of these complex processes. So specifically S723, which is the Tribal Trust Land Homeownership Act of 2025. This bill would have required BIA to provide faster response times for certified title status reports, improved notification about processing delays, and give federal agencies and tribes read-only access to the Trust Asset Accounting Management System, also known as TAMS. It also aims to improve transparency and streamlining of processes associated with trust land transactions, including mortgage documents. It has passed out of the Senate multiple times, but has yet to be cleared through the House. The next proposed legislation that addresses trust land is in short, the Tribal Trust Land Reaffirmation Act. This bill would reaffirm that all current lands put in a trust on behalf of federally recognized tribes by the Department of Interior are officially reaffirmed as trust lands. So again, trying to clear up any confusion in terms of trust land assignment or designation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jackie for the next few slides. Thank you.
Thank you. So many of us have been working and advocating hard about the Build America, Buy America Act provisions that impact us in housing and requiring us to make sure that all the materials and products that we use meet the criteria, and recognizing that in particularly housing construction and housing maintenance, that not all of our materials do come from the United States or are manufactured in the United States currently. And while NAIC and NCAI both support manufacturing in America, we recognize that these limitations sometimes will be costly and cause more challenges to the already difficulty that we have in our communities. We have joined together to request of HUD and OMB and Congress to put in exemptions in place, permanent exemptions for us as we're developing our housing and working on housing programs, so that this BABA requirements will not compound in already critical problems or add to excessive costs, which we already experience in our rural and remote parts of the country. So we hope that you can continue to join us with those requests. HUD did put forward some attempt to fix by putting in place caps on either size of grants and also caps on numbers of units, but that does not fully address the challenges to in our communities. So stay tuned. We'll continue to work on the BABA exemptions. The next slide, please. Other things that are challenges, of course, is the infrastructure barriers. In Indian country, unlike urban America, when they have low-income housing or they're redoing a community, they have existing water, sewer, roads, all of those infrastructure components in place. most projects or developments that happen in Indian country require infrastructure, and we know those barriers are great. Some of those things that we're asking for, of course, is to have to be able to coordinate better with IHS, and to make sure that the restriction of NAHASDA units is lifted, so that there could be better coordination, and be able to commingle and work on our projects jointly. But we also are looking for, especially with HUD and the limited amount of funding, sometimes we have to do an infrastructure only project, and then we can't even get to the housing construction until a successive application later that gets approved. So various serious issues around infrastructure. When this country was dealing with the infrastructure bills during COVID, housing was excluded, and so we were not able to address housing infrastructure needs through those resources. Regional variations that happen, of course, I'm from Alaska, we see it very distinctly in Alaska, large land base with very difficult, a good percentage of our communities lack actual road access. You have to get there by a small plane or by boat. Barges are only seasonal, and ice roads are seasonal. But we see those same kind of challenges and challenges like that across rural America and other communities in Indian country, where these housing conditions and variations are very real, whether it be the extreme heats, the fires in certain areas, the extreme cold winds, tornadoes, all of those kinds of things that Indian country tends to address. And recognizing NAHASDA has continued to recognize, and so does the funding source, recognize that these uniquenesses in these undeveloped parts of America. Next slide. And with that, we're moving into, right after that, to talk about our housing programs.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will kick this off, and I want to be mindful of time. So I will be giving a brief overview of the programs at HUD ONAP under NAHASDA, and then also under the Community Development Block Grant, the Indian Community Development Block Grant. So if we can move to the next slide. So we did touch on IHBG previously. This program is foundational to NAHASDA. It supports a variety of activities, including construction, rehab, infrastructure, and housing services across Indian country. But, key to highlight here, with costs, rapidly rising and inflation, we must continue to, fund, again, at the baseline, fund IHBG at a level that is on par with its original purchasing power, and make sure that that continues to happen, so that tribal housing programs are not left behind. If we can go to the next slide. And so, as I mentioned, variety of programs, and I just want to highlight, you can see here around 60%. This is the activities most commonly funded through the IHBG. And so around 60% goes to Indian housing assistance and development, and then around 40% for other services such as planning and administration, housing management services, and other activities by the TDHEs. So for the next slide, we did see this graph earlier, but I just wanted to touch on this again, and I did see in the chat, I do want to recognize, getting back to this purchasing power and this level of funding was not all in one go. In fiscal year 21 and 22, we could see that there are these increases that help us to move in that direction and get to the level that we're at today. And that was thanks to our champions in the House and the Senate. And I do want to highlight Senator Schatz for his leadership and work there. Next slide. And then I also did want to touch on today the Indian Community Development Block Grant. Tribes rely on this for vital infrastructure. And then I just want to highlight here, in the last funding round, HUD received 103 applications, but could only fund 41, I believe. And so what you see here is that there is demand and there is need here for the funding, but the funding's not quite matching up. And so then I also wanted to, especially, given the Typhoon Halong and the impacts that we're seeing in Alaska, a component of ICDBG is imminent threat. And this funding has been used and continues to be used for rehabilitation of damaged or unsafe homes, following a disaster, debris removal and site stabilization and temporary relocation assistance, just to name a few of the ways that that funding can be used. And so especially in, situations and circumstances that we're seeing today, this funding is critical and necessary. Next slide. And then the Title VI Loan Guarantee Program. This unlocks development capital for Indian country. HUD guarantees 95% of the loan, which enables tribes to leverage private financing. But compliance burdens can and do slow down projects. And so just another point to highlight here, with NAHASDA reauthorization, we would be able to make efforts to streamline procurement, environmental review, and hopefully accelerate delivery here with this program. Next slide. And then the Section 184 Loan Guarantee Program remains the primary tool for Native homebuyers on and off trust land. And I do, again, want to highlight reauthorization of this program would expand eligibility for the Section 184 program nationwide, would allow Native CDFIs to serve as lenders, and would authorize this 184 program through 2035, along with NAHASDA as a whole. Next slide. And then I do want to highlight the Tribal HUD-VASH program. As we mentioned, a key recommendation that we have for NAHASDA reauthorization is ensuring that this program is made permanent. This program has been utilized by tribes and TDHEs to ensure that our Native veterans are not left behind and are able to secure housing vouchers. And it has been, incredibly successful in like the limited, pilot program, as it has been able to be. And so we do want to see this program be made permanent, and be expanded so that, our Native veterans can secure safe, quality housing. Next slide. All right, and I'll turn it over to Matt for the HIP program.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I know we already covered this in an earlier slide, so just quickly, the Housing Improvement Program received $12.2 million in FY24. I want to also note that the Tribal Interior Budget Council, which is represented by the 12 BI regions, puts together an annual budget recommendation for the administration. They are estimating, providing a cost estimate that the HIP program needs approximately $1 billion to adequately address the need out there through HIP. So 12.2 million is far, far below that. But again, the HIP program is an alternative housing program offered through the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Just quickly, it can be used for housing repairs, renovations, construction, housing down payment, and or construction of homes for families who do not own a home but have ownership or lease of sufficient land suitable for housing. And I will turn this back to you, Blythe.
Awesome, thank you, Matt. And so this program was also mentioned earlier, but I just want to make sure we highlight this again, the Native CDFI Relending Demonstration Program at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. This program is a testament to, as I mentioned earlier, what we already know, which is that when Native-led community development financial institutions provide the financing and understand what it means to try to become a homeowner on tribal lands, that Native families succeed. And so we want to see this program continue to have staff to operate it. And it's been, really successful compared to prior to the program launching, 1 in 1,200 plus certified USDA loan packagers was a native CDFI. We've had a lot more success and seen this program grow. So this is another critical program, especially for home ownership in Indian country. And then I will pass it back to Matt for the Department of Treasury.
Thank you. Again, want to highlight just the other programs that are out there across the federal agencies. So here we'll focus on the Department of Treasury and some very critical programs underneath them. First one is the CDFI fund, which is a fund within Treasury program that promotes economic revitalization for distressed communities. And the CDFI fund was first established through the Rigel Community Development and Regulatory Improvement Act of 1994. It's important to note that this was originally created as an independent government corporation, but moved shortly a year later over to fully under Treasury. One of the critical programs under the CDFI fund is the Native American CDFI Assistance Program, also known as NAHCA. Under this program, awards are funded, awards fund certified CDFIs primarily serving American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiians through three programs. The first, financial assistance; second, healthy food financing initiative; and technical assistance grants. One of the biggest participation programs is the financial assistance. And so that program is to gain access to loans, grants, deposits, and equity investments that will not only directly support the CDFI's work, but also make their organization more attractive to outside investors. Financial assistance awards can be used as lending capital, equity, or loan loss reserves, among other things. And just want to quickly note that the NAHCA program represents a critical component of the CDFI fund's mission, which is addressing the unique challenges that Native communities face in accessing capital and financial services. Another program under Treasury is the low-income housing tax credit. So again, low-income housing tax credit was created in the Tax Reform Act of '86, and provides tax incentives to developers and investors to help build or renovate housing for low-income tenants. Low-income housing has financed approximately 3.6 affordable apartments since 1986. Currently finances around 90% of all affordable rental housing units built in the U.S. and is the single largest source of new affordable housing production. The program has evolved from a temporary experiment to become a cornerstone of U.S. affordable housing policy, which significantly reshapes how affordable housing is financed and developed. A couple recent legislative efforts that I want to highlight here, specific to low-income housing tax credit. So under H.R. 1, the One Big Beautiful Bill, Section 70422 is a permanent enhancement for the low-income housing tax credit. While low-income housing tax credit provision reaffirmed the definition of difficult development areas, or DDAs, most tribal areas do not qualify under current DDA standards. This legislation has been signed into law. There is proposed legislation in Senate Bill 2022, the Tribal Tax and Investment Reform Act. Within that legislation, specifically under Section 9, would modify the definition of difficult development area to include Indian area. And Indian area means any area within which an Indian tribe or tribally designated housing entity provides assistance under this chapter for affordable housing. And so another program under Treasury is the Housing Assistance Fund. So this Housing Assistance Fund was really a product that came out of the pandemic, in which millions of homeowners faced financial hardship due to job loss, reduced income, business closures or economic disruption, increased medical expenses, or eventual expiration of federal foreclosure moratoriums. By early 2021, millions of homeowners were behind on mortgage payments. Foreclosure moratoriums were set to expire, and there was a concern of a wave of foreclosures that could destabilize families in the housing market. What the Housing Assistance Fund was able to do was allow tribes the flexibility to design programs that met their community-specific needs, address the unique housing situations like homes on trust land, and address challenges specific for tribal housing, such as limited access to traditional mortgage financing. So again, was a critical program that helped support tribal nations as well as the rest of the country, but kept folks from being on the street and help try to keep people's lives from being completely disrupted by the pandemic. Next program's the SSBCI, or the State Small Business Credit Initiative. So originally established in 2010, and then reauthorized again under the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, in which there was $500 million allocated to tribal governments. Most tribes receiving their first funding in 23, and just again with the statutory 3-year window, so that would these funds would be available through the fall of 2026. One thing that Indian country would like to see is to see Congress support and urge Treasury to maintain full statutory expenditure timelines for tribal governments, ensure SSBCI allocations remain fully available for deployment to Native borrowers and tribally owned businesses, and continue supporting technical assistance programs and program flexibility to help tribes achieve meaningful and sustainable economic outcomes. So moving on from Treasury and over to Department of Veterans Affairs, just quickly, the Native American Direct Loan Program was created in 1992 under Public Law 102547 as part of a larger housing legislation that expanded VA home loan benefits to Native Americans. The program is to help address the gap in home financing for Native American veterans, as conventional loans are typically unavailable for homes on trust land, as we mentioned before. What NADL does is it authorizes the VA to make direct loans to Native Americans, unlike other VA loans that are done through VA guarantee loans from private lenders. Importantly, there's no down payment required in most cases. No private mortgage insurance is required. And this product offers a very low interest rate at a 30-year fixed mortgage. So most of these mortgages start at a 2.5% interest rate. And another key provision of the NADL is to allow the ability of these veterans to refinance their current NADL loans for a lower interest rate. And then next, we're going to go into sort of a pathway forward, which means that we are going to be planning a follow-up webinar to this. This will happen to be determined on specific date, but we are projecting this to happen in January of 2026. Why January 2026? Well, that is when we are really anticipating the legislators to have some legislative text ready for the reintroduction of NAHASDA reauthorization. So really in January, we're hoping that the second part of the webinar will be a deep dive into the critical language and provisions of the proposed reauthorization. So while this webinar was a chance for folks to get up to speed on what the history and some of the critical issues facing Indian housing, this second webinar is where we really dive into the language provisions of the reauthorization text. Also important to note is there are some upcoming sessions. So NCAI will be having our 82nd annual convention, as Executive Director Wright mentioned, November 16th through the 21st in Seattle. That is also at the same time as NIHC's legal symposium happening November 17th through the 20th in Durant, Oklahoma. So tough decision there, which one you want to go to. But a lot of great opportunities in the next few weeks. In 2026, we'll have NCAI will be hosting the Executive Council Winter Session, February 8th through the 11th in Washington, D.C. And NIHC will be the week prior with their legislative summit and gala happening February 3rd through 5th, also in Washington, D.C. Here are some of the flyers and QR.
Matt, we can't hear you.
All right. We're having some audio issues, but we did get to those flyers for the events are in the slides. We're a little over time, but if anyone wants to throw any additional questions into the Q&A box, we'll be happy to follow up with you after the webinar. And I just want to hand it to, yes.
I just wanted to answer the one question that showed up a couple times in there. I did just put something in the box, but that's about the SSBCI. And because the rumor of the accelerated timeline for closing out the grant, and just want to let people know that NCAN, Pete and other organizations, all the organizations that you see on this meeting here today are all working on trying to get that clarity around that. There's been no official announcement that they are moving up the deadline. However, we have been told by Treasury that the statutory closeout of that date means that they will have to accelerate the drawdown deadline in order for them to close out in time. And so they'll likely see something to that effect, of course, unless Congress decides to extend the statutory deadline. But right now, that's what's the impetus for discussing an acceleration. But there's been no official date that it's been accelerated to at this point. I would just recommend people be working hard on spending down their SSBCI and getting that taken care of. And I would also say that about the half payments too, even though hasn't been anything about half, but I do know that they expect to close that on time. And that, so you'd want to get those taken care of. Thank you.
So there's another question in the Q&A. Los Angeles is one of the largest urban Native locations. Are any of these programs accessible to Native-led orgs and urban Indian for urban Indians?
I would say there's a number of urban Indian groups that organize, and they're eligible for a variety of grants that are even non-Native community organization grants too. And so I would look at those. The grants that we are largely talked about today are tribally directed grants eligible to tribes and designated tribal housing entities. And so there needs to be that connection to tribe. But there are programs such as that USDA and other programs within HUD that urban Indian organizations could can utilize. And a person who's really knowledgeable about that is Iris Friday out of Seattle. You can get a hold of her through the Seattle center there.
There's another question in the Q&A. Is any, since we're currently in a shutdown, are all these funding sources that you shared available now, or are they impacted by the shutdown?
I would say that all of them are like ongoing. The ICDBG NOFO is out right now. The IHBG competitive NOFO is out. The deadline for the ICDBG is November 24th. I can't remember the one for the competitive, but they're all in process. And then of course the formula funds for NAHASDA comes out on an annual basis, and that's already in play. Programs, however, like the USDA, 502 Direct, those we're hoping to get more money from Congress to up the ante, to get more money available. But when Congress isn't, when the federal government is closed, those programs that are, direct funded sources to individual grantees, those selections are not happening and that program's not moving forward.
All right. Thank you, Jackie. There's another Q&A in the chat, but I did want to note, I put in the chat, SSBIC does have office hours, and I put in the chat the office hours for this week. Unfortunately, the links didn't copy over, but if you're interested in getting some technical assistance from SSBCI, you can email the chat or email the address I put in the chat, ssbci_information@treasury.gov. And then there's one final question in the Q&A box. Are any housing authorities developing policies that hardens new housing against climate change and rising sea levels? Anyone developing an economic development enterprise, perhaps steel modular units that produce housing units for tribes and others that creates the sustainable jobs for their communities? And then is any housing development taking place under force account? Thank you.
I'll go ahead and answer that question. There are a lot of tribes, particularly in Alaska, who are having to deal with climate change impacts and relocation. And they have relocation plans largely led by the tribes and the local community to address those relocation issues. I actually went up and saw one with the secretary this summer, and the community's taking it on. They do get assistance from the Corps of Engineers, but that's slow, but it is available. As far as I think there's a lot of really good stuff that Indian Housing is doing across the country with sustainable housing units and sustainable jobs in communities, building a lot of force account. A lot of TDHEs operate their own housing construction and in their communities at a sustainable rate. And that's why the leveraging and the planning and development is so essential, are essential elements. NAHC is a really great opportunity to go there and go to their conferences, and you can learn a lot about what people are doing. And we've been asking HUD to, we went to the innovations conference from the TIAC, the Secretary's Tribal Advisory Committee, to provide more technical assistance in the innovations that are happening across the country that Indian country can adapt.
And the last one is actually quite a helpful comment that the IHBG Formula Customer Service Center remains open for IHBG formula questions. And that is everything that was in the Q&A box.
And I would just say that as the last comment, that I think it's really going to be important for those of you who are interested to really plan on attending our next webinar. At that point, we will have been in the midst of developing the actual NAHASDA reauthorization legislation with our partners in Congress. We have a list of the recommendations that we want to include, and I've identified those proposals. And we would love to share them with you and go through each of those proposals in our next planned webinar in January.
So I will close this out. Matt may not have audio. And so I would just want to thank everyone for staying on the line. I know we went a little bit over, but this information was very, very important and topical. We will be, NCAI will be posting a copy of this webinar as well as the slides and other materials both on our website and on our YouTube page within 3 to 5 days. We will send an email out to all of the registrants to let them know when that happens. But you can always just check NCAI's website. In the chat, I've put in information about NCAI, about NAIHC. We are so thankful for our partnerships with NAIHC, especially on this issue, and we look forward to getting NAHASDA passed in 2026. And we thank you again for sitting on this webinar today, and we will see you in January. Hopefully, we'll also see you earlier in November at one of our competing conferences, but have a